Today's mindful moment. Have you ever stumbled upon some old ruins? Just, broken stones, maybe some faded carvings?
hmm
Feels like an ending, maybe. But doesn't it also spark something in your mind? Like a
Oh,
beginning.
absolutely. You think about Delaveil, centuries back, wandering through those Mesopotamian ruins.
Right.
He saw those fragments, and it wasn't just dead rock. It sparked a vision, didn't it? A whole lost world.
Exactly. It's in those quieter moments, looking at what's left behind, that we really start to understand.
And we can think of those as sort of mindful moments, really, reflecting on this vast sweep of history. That's where we can maybe figure out some patterns, how societies change.
That's what we're diving into today. We're looking at historical accounts, civilizations rising, falling, starting way back with Sumer, moving through to, the Aztecs, the Inca.
It's a huge time frame.
It is.
Okay.
But the goal isn't just to list collapses, is it? We want to look for maybe some positive theories. How did people bounce back? What allowed them to transform, to adapt?
Yeah, trying to get a fresh look at the forces shaping things. Resilience is key.
So let's start at the beginning, or near enough. Early Mesopotamia, the Sumerians.
Right. They had the first real city-states, built around temples, interestingly, ruled by priest kings, but they also had these, semi-democratic councils.
So not just top-down rule initially,
It seems not, and that early period seems relatively peaceful, actually.
almost like a foundational myth, like Inanna getting the gifts of civilization, writing, crafts, all of it. Like they knew they were building something.
That myth is fascinating because it speaks to that deliberate creation of order. But crucially, alongside those gifts, Inanna also receives deceit and plundering.
So even in the founding story, there's a shadow.
Exactly. A hint of the conflict to come. Even in Uruk, a major city then, life was complex markets, different jobs. The seeds of instability might have been there right from the start, even when things looked good.
And then you see power consolidating. Figures like Lugal-Zadsi making these huge claims, maybe exaggerated.
Possibly. But then you get Sargon of Akkad. What a story.
The foundling who became emperor.
Yeah. Foundling, cupbearer, then boom, founder of the Akkadian Empire. It shows how one person's ambition, their agency, could just reshape the whole landscape. A single individual creating a new kind of order.
But empires don't last forever. Sargon's great-grandson, Shar-Kali-Shori, things started to decline under him.
They did, and it's interesting. Some accounts mention a major celestial event around then maybe the comet Hale-Bopp.
Wow. Makes you wonder how people interpreted things like that, especially when times felt unstable.
For sure. And then you had external pressures too. The Guti invasions, the Sumerians described them as monstrous hill people. And there's that text, the Curse of Akkad, which basically says the gods sent the Guti as punishment. Societies often try to make moral sense of their own decline, don't they?
So Akkad falls, Ur falls later. Babylon and Assyria rise. But the Sumerian culture didn't just vanish.
Not at all. The language survived for, millennia, used in religious ceremonies and rituals. It became the language of myth and magic.
That's incredible. A ghost language, almost. And that title, King of Ur, King of Sumer and Akkad, kept being used.
For centuries, it remained this powerful symbol of legitimacy, long after Sumer itself was gone.
Okay, so moving forward quite a bit, the late Bronze Age collapse, this sounds like a big one, affecting lots of places at once.
A huge one. Across the Mediterranean, we're talking Mycenaean, Greece, Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant, Crete, Babylon, Assyria, all hit by major disruptions around the same time.
So interconnected.
Very. The Uluburun shipwreck is amazing evidence for that. Found off the coast of Turkey.
What was on it?
Oh, everything. Copper from Cyprus, tin likely from Afghanistan, glass from Mesopotamia or Egypt, ebony from Africa, pottery, weapons, goods from maybe 10 different cultures.
Wow, that paints a picture. A truly globalized world in its way.
Absolutely. And when it collapsed, it wasn't just one kingdom failing. It shows how fragile those complex interdependent systems can be.
People often blame the sea peoples for this collapse, right? Raiders coming from the sea.
That's the traditional narrative, yes. But the evidence now points towards a whole mess of problems happening together. Big earthquakes, volcanic eruptions maybe in Italy or Santorini, significant climate shifts, weird weather patterns.
So the sea peoples might not have been the cause so much as maybe another symptom, or even refugees themselves.
That's a very real possibility. People displaced by the same crises hitting everyone else. The archaeology definitely shows a power vacuum, widespread destruction, a lot of societal stress.
Is there anything like myths or stories from that time that capture that feeling?
There is the Hittite myth of Telepinu. He's a god who vanishes, and when he disappears, crops fail, animals stop breeding, everything just withers.
Yeah.
Desolation. It really feels like it captures the spirit of that age.
A story born from crisis. It reminds us collapse is usually complicated, not just one thing.
Almost never just one thing. It's usually a convergence of pressures and vulnerabilities.
And out of that chaos, new players eventually emerged, like the Assyrians.
Yes. And fast forward many centuries, you have Xenophon, the Greek writer, marching through Mesopotamia and seeing the ruins of the great Assyrian cities, like Nimrud and Nineveh.
Imagine that. For the Greeks, who were just sort of coming into their own, seeing the remains of this earlier superpower must have been humbling.
A powerful lesson in how fleeting power can be. The Assyrians themselves, like Tiglath-Pileser I, they left these incredibly detailed records, boasting about conquests, listing tribute, even the exotic animals they collected for royal parks. You see their ambition, their organization.
But even they weren't immune to problems, right? I remember something about prophecies and paranoia.
Yeah. The story about Sennacherib's predicted doom. His successor, Esarhaddon, became obsessed with omens. There was even this bizarre ritual where they'd appoint a temporary substitute king to absorb any bad luck aimed at the real king.
Seriously. Substitute king.
Seriously, it shows a kind of deep-seated anxiety maybe even at the height of their power.
And in the end, how did Assyria fall?
A coalition. The Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar teamed up with the Medes. They besieged Nineveh. There's archaeological evidence from one of the gates, the Halsey Gate, skeletons, weapons, a snapshot of that final brutal battle.
So their great cities were destroyed.
Utterly. A stark reminder that even the most fearsome empires can be brought down. The last Assyrian resistance held out for a bit in Haran, but that was basically the end.
Okay, let's shift gears westward. Carthage, North Africa. Their origin story is pretty dramatic too, isn't it? Dido.
Very dramatic. Queen Dido, or Ilisar, fleeing Tyre, founding the city, and her eventual sacrifice. That story immediately sets up this identity of being survivors, resourceful people, masters of the sea.
And the city itself was impressive.
Oh, yeah. Huge walls, a famous double harbor, one military, one commercial, multi-story houses, grand temples. And they used those North African elephants in warfare, which are now extinct.
Wow. Elephants as tanks. What about their relationship with Rome initially?
Surprisingly cooperative at first. There were treaties, suggestions they might even ally against the Greeks, who were also expanding in the Mediterranean.
But then Rome got stronger.
Inevitably, Rome's rise, especially its conflicts with Greek cities in southern Italy, put it on a collision course with Carthage's sphere of influence, leading to the Punic Wars.
Hannibal crossing the Alps. That's the famous part.
Legendary. But ultimately, it was Rome's sheer persistence, embodied by Cato the Elder constantly saying Carthage must be destroyed, that proved decisive.
They were relentless.
Completely. The final siege in 146 BCE was horrific. Rome made impossible demands, Carthage resisted bravely, but the Romans breached the walls. There was a 6-day street-by-street massacre. Survivors were enslaved.
Just wiped off the map. A chilling example of what happens when empires clash.
Absolutely. The brutal consequence of unchecked imperial ambition.
Okay, let's swing over to East Asia. Han China. Geography seems key there too. The Yellow River.
Hugely important. The Yellow River, the Huanghe, source of fertile land but also devastating floods, the River of Sorrow, and the Yanks further south, plus that crucial corridor to the west, the Hexi Corridor.
And their big challenge was the Xiongnu nomads to the west.
Yes, the Xiongnu Confederation, a constant pressure on the Han frontier. This conflict really shaped early Han history and their westward expansion.
Is that where the Great Wall comes in?
It is, though the Han Dynasty sections were mostly packed earth, not the stone walls we often picture. But they were effective against the Xiongnu's main tactic, swift cavalry raids. The walls channeled movement, neutralized that advantage.
And it worked.
Eventually, yes. Along with diplomacy and military campaigns, it contributed to the Xiongnu Confederation splintering and parts of it submitting to the Han. It shows how adapting your defenses to this specific threat is crucial.
We also hear about Chinese explorers heading west around this time. Zhang Qian.
Right. Zhang Qian's missions were incredible journeys. He brought back information about Central Asia, Persia, even hazy reports about a distant empire in the west, which was probably Rome, though his official reports might have been, let's say, edited for the emperor.
And Gan Ying almost made it to Roman territory.
Almost. He got as far as the Persian Gulf, apparently, but the Parthians, who controlled the trade routes, discouraged him from going further, likely wanting to keep their role as middlemen. Those journeys show the first fragile links forming across Eurasia.
And speaking of journeys and links, this feels like a good moment to mention our friends over at Mindful Moments and our podcasts. It's an AI audiobook analysis channel on YouTube exploring themes of change and adaptation in stories from history and literature. Worth checking out for more perspectives like these.
Definitely a good resource. But back to the Han. Their strength didn't last forever either, did it? Internal problems.
Yes. Big internal problems.
Yeah.
The growing power and wealth of court eunuchs became a major issue. Corruption manipulating emperors, it destabilized the government.
Which led to...
Well, it fueled discontent. You get the massive Yellow Turban Rebellion, a huge peasant uprising, and later, the chaos when the warlord Dong Zhuo seized power, deposed the emperor, moved the capital. It led to economic collapse and tyranny.
So internal rot, really, weakening them from within, a common pattern.
Very common.
Okay.
Now let's jump across the map again. Roman Britain. Why were the Romans even interested? It seems like a difficult place to conquer.
It was. Caesar's initial invasions were more like reconnaissance raids, not full conquests. The channel crossing was tricky and local resistance was fierce. It wasn't an easy win.
So what was Roman rule like there? Did they build cities and roads?
They did. Roads, towns, villas, the usual Roman infrastructure, but it was also about exploitation resources, taxes, and the native tribes, especially if it picks up north, never fully submitted. They were resilient, used guerrilla tactics. That's why Hadrian's Wall was built.
To keep them out?
Primarily, yes, to control movement and define the border. But Britain had this unique issue. The sheer number of Roman soldiers stationed there.
How was that a problem?
It created what some historians call the British paradox. A large, experienced army stationed far from Rome could be a threat to Rome. Ambitious governors or generals in Britain could, and did, use those legions to make a bid for the imperial throne.
Like who?
Figures like Clodius Albinus, or later Magnus Maximus, they'd declare themselves emperor, take troops from Britain to fight on the continent.
Leaving Britain vulnerable.
Exactly, vulnerable to raids from the Picts, from Saxons crossing the North Sea. When Maximus took his troops away, it seems to have triggered a real economic downturn and more instability back in Britain. He was eventually defeated and executed, but the damage was done.
And eventually Rome just pulled out.
Pretty much. In the early 5th century, the legions were withdrawn for good to deal with crises closer to home. The official link was severed.
What happened then? Did everything just collapse?
It was a complex transition. Locals started quarrying stones from Hadrian's Wall for their own buildings. Tribal leaders moved into abandoned Roman forts. Some Roman traditions continued for a while, but memories faded. Cities like York were largely abandoned.
And the incoming Anglo-Saxons, did they move into the Roman cities?
Interestingly, no, not initially. They often seemed to avoid the stone ruins, maybe seeing them as haunted or unlucky. There is even some archaeological evidence suggesting ritual actions, perhaps to ward off curses associated with the old Roman sites. A real sense of a world ending and another beginning.
Wow. Okay, across the Atlantic now. The Maya. We picture these incredible jungle cities like Tikal.
Absolutely. The classic Maya civilization was a network of powerful city-states in the lowlands, really sophisticated culture, astronomy, writing. But then around the mid-10th century, there's this abrupt collapse. The major lowland cities are abandoned.
What happened? Is it still debated?
Oh, very much so. There were intense rivalries between cities like Tikal and Calakmul, external influences too, maybe from the big city of Teotihuacan in central Mexico. Rulers like Doublebird presided over periods of intense warfare.
So warfare is one theory for the collapse.
Definitely a factor. But also likely overpopulation straining resources and significant environmental degradation. Deforestation seems to have been a major issue.
How did that affect them?
Well, in that region, deforestation can actually make droughts much worse by reducing humidity and local rainfall. They had developed incredibly sophisticated water management systems, reservoirs, canals showing they knew water was critical. But severe, prolonged droughts, possibly linked to climate shifts, seem to have overwhelmed their infrastructure.
So maybe a combination of war, environmental damage, and climate change.
That's the most likely scenario. Spanish accounts from centuries later describe the horrifying impact of drought and famine in the region. When Europeans later encountered the ruins overgrown by jungle, it created this enduring mystery about who built them and why they left.
Shifting to Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire. Angkor Wat is the famous image there.
Right. Angkor Wat is staggering, but it was part of a much larger empire. Early Khmer culture was heavily influenced by India Hinduism, Sanskrit for the elite, the caste system, though Buddhism was also widespread among the common people.
How did the empire get started?
A key figure is Jayavarman II. He led a rebellion against domination by the neighboring Cham people, had himself consecrated in an elaborate ritual as a universal monarch, and established a capital, Hariharalaya, with massive reservoirs, or bures. Water management was central from the beginning.
And Angkor itself came later.
Yes, the empire reached its peak under rulers like Suryavarman II, who built Angkor Wat, and later Jayavarman II, who built Angkor Thom and oversaw a huge expansion, including an extensive road network connecting the empire.
But like the others, it declined. Why?
Defending the vast, flat plains around Angkor was always a challenge. Ironically, that great road network might have made it easier for invaders, too. There were repeated invasions and sieges by the rising Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya.
They sacked Angkor.
Yes, notably in 1352 and again decisively in 1431. After that final sack, the Khmer elite abandoned Angkor and moved the capital south to Phnom Penh.
Were there environmental factors here too, like with the Maya?
It seems very likely. Evidence points to prolonged, severe droughts in the mid-14th and early 15th centuries, potentially decades long. This would have put immense strain on their incredibly complex, aging water management system. It's possible that mismanagement, or simply the system breaking down under extreme conditions, led to catastrophic failures, maybe even devastating floods when the rains finally returned after a long drought.
Another case of that delicate balance between society and environment.
Absolutely. A sophisticated system becomes a vulnerability when pushed beyond its limits.
Okay, back towards Europe. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople.
The successor state to Rome in the east, Constantinople itself was a strategic masterpiece. Hugely defensible peninsula, massive walls, plus their secret weapon, Greek fire.
Greek fire.
A liquid incendiary weapon they could shoot from ships. Terrifying stuff. It helped them fend off numerous sieges over the centuries. They saw themselves as the continuation of Rome, the eye of the world, a cosmopolitan hub.
But they eventually ran into trouble with the Crusades. Weren't they Christians too?
They were. Emperor Alexios initially asked for help from the West against the Seljuk Turks, but the response was chaotic. First, the disastrous People's Crusade, mostly unarmed pilgrims. Then the First Crusade, which was militarily successful but also created friction.
And the Fourth Crusade was the real disaster for Byzantium.
The absolute worst. 1204. Driven largely by Venetian commercial interests and political maneuvering, the Crusaders ended up attacking and sacking Constantinople itself. A Christian army sacking the greatest Christian city.
What happened during the sack?
It was horrific. 3 days of looting, massacre, desecration of churches. Priceless relics and artworks were stolen or destroyed. The famous bronze horses now on St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. Stolen from Constantinople then.
That must have crippled the empire.
Terribly. They eventually retook the city, but Byzantium never fully recovered. It was depopulated, impoverished, and then hit by the Black Death in the mid-14th century like everyone else. It was a shadow of its former self.
Leading up to the final fall.
To the Ottoman Turks under Sultan Mehmed II in 1453. After a long siege, they breached the walls. The fall of Constantinople was a massive, symbolic blow to Christendom and arguably marked the end of the Middle Ages.
But it had another effect too, didn't it? With scholars fleeing west.
Yes, a significant consequence. Many Byzantine scholars fled to Italy, bringing Greek manuscripts and knowledge with them. This influx played a crucial role in fueling the European Renaissance. And ironically, Mehmed the Conqueror saw his Ottoman Empire as the new Roman Empire, the successor state.
History keeps circling back. Let's go to India now, the Vijayanagar Empire.
Right, down in southern India. Another compelling foundation story, two brothers, Harihara and Bukka, guided by a sage named Viduranya, established a city called Vijayanagara, meaning city of victory.
And it grew quickly.
Very quickly. Became incredibly wealthy, a major trading hub. What's interesting is its reputation for religious tolerance, attracting Hindu, Muslim, and Jain merchants. Accounts from visitors like Abdul Razak from Persia and Duarte Barbosa from Portugal describe amazing markets overflowing with goods, spices, jewels. Sounds vibrant. Any internal issues, or yes, power struggles, assassination attempts. Devaraya II survived attempts on his life. Later, Krishna Devaraya had a very successful reign, expanding the empire, defeating neighboring sultanates partly thanks to Portuguese mercenaries with firearms arquebuses.
Gunpowder started to shift the balance there, too.
Exactly. But his successor, Ramaraya, got caught up in complex diplomacy, trying to play the various Deccan sultanates against each other.
Did that backfire?
Spectacularly, he alienated them all, and they eventually united against him. The result was the Battle of Talikota in 1565.
A decisive battle.
Utterly decisive. Ramaraya was captured and executed on the battlefield. The Vijayanagara army routed. The allied sultans then marched on the capital and spent months sacking and looting it.
So Vijayanagara city was abandoned.
Completely abandoned. It became this vast ruin field. Later European explorers like Colin Mackenzie documented the remains: palaces, elephant stables, temples, the sophisticated water features. Another magnificent city turned to ruins, known locally as Alpatoon, the ruined city.
Moving to West Africa now, the Songhai Empire.
Yeah.
Centered on the Niger River.
Yes, the Niger was crucial for agriculture and trade. Texts like the Tariq al-Fatash describe the region as incredibly fertile and wealthy.
Who were the key rulers?
Sunni Ali was a major figure, a great military leader who expanded the empire significantly in the late 15th century. Though he also clashed with Islamic scholars who criticized his traditional beliefs. His death is somewhat mysterious, drowned crossing a river.
And after him?
His son was challenged and overthrown by one of Sunni Ali's generals, who became Askia Muhammad. He's often seen as ruling during Songhai's golden age. He professionalized the army, expanded the empire further, capturing the vital Tagaza salt mines in the Sahara.
Salt was that important?
Hugely valuable. Askia Muhammad also made a famous pilgrimage to Mecca, which helped foster a sense of unity across the diverse ethnic groups within the empire. He was a skilled administrator as well as a military leader.
So what brought Songhai down? It sounded like it was thriving.
An external shock, mainly. The Sultan of Morocco, wanting Songhai's gold wealth, sent an army across the Sahara in 1591.
Across the Sahara, that's a huge undertaking.
It was. And crucially, the Moroccans had firearms, arquebuses, and cannons, while the Songhai army relied mainly on traditional cavalry and infantry.
Gunpowder again.
Gunpowder again. At the Battle of Tondibi, the Songhai army, despite its size, was routed by the Moroccan firepower. The empire collapsed quickly after that defeat, fragmenting into smaller states.
And that left the region vulnerable.
Yes, vulnerable to further instability and, eventually, to European colonial interference and the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. When European explorers like Heinrich Barth reached the area centuries later, they were disappointed to find only the ruins of Gao, the once great capital. News traveled slowly then. The full impact wasn't immediately felt on the coasts where Europeans were mainly trading.
Let's cross the Atlantic one last time. The Aztecs, or the Mexica as they called themselves, their capital, Tenochtitlan.
An incredible city, built on islands in Lake Texcoco. The foundation myth involves an eagle on a cactus with a serpent still on the Mexican flag today. They adapted brilliantly to that unique lake environment, building chinampas, floating gardens for agriculture, and harvesting salt.
How did they compare to Old World civilizations?
Huge population, complex society, monumental architecture, but significant differences. Very few domesticated animals, no horses, cattle, or sheep. No draft animals meant wheeled vehicles weren't really practical, even though they knew the principle of the wheel, using it in toys. Human power was key.
And then the Spanish arrived, Cortés.
Hernán Cortés. His expedition in 1519 started somewhat controversially. The governor of Cuba tried to recall him, but Cortés essentially went rogue.
He didn't have a huge army, did he?
No, only a few hundred Spaniards. But he was skilled at diplomacy and warfare. Crucially, he allied with groups who resented Aztec rule, especially the Tlaxcalans. They provided the bulk of the manpower. The massacre at Cholula, on the way to Tenochtitlan, showed their ruthlessness.
What was the first encounter like in Tenochtitlan?
The Spanish were apparently awestruck by the city's scale and sophistication. Emperor Moctezuma II seems to have initially tried to appease them, offering gifts of gold and treasure.
Which probably just made them want more.
Likely. Things deteriorated quickly. Cortés had to leave the city briefly, and his lieutenant, Alvarado, ordered an attack on unarmed Mexican nobles during a religious festival, the Toxcatl Massacre. That sparked open warfare.
Leading to the siege of Tenochtitlan.
A brutal siege. The Spanish had advantages: steel weapons, cannons, horses, their Tlaxcalan allies, and, devastatingly, European diseases like smallpox, to which the native population had no immunity.
But the Mexica fought back hard.
Fiercely. They adapted their tactics, learned to counter cavalry, fought street by street. But famine, disease, and the Spanish cutting off the freshwater supply took a terrible toll. The city finally fell on August 13th, 1521, after months of fighting.
A tragic end. And further south, the Inca Empire in the Andes.
An equally impressive civilization in a very different, challenging environment. The Andes create these incredible vertical ecosystems, from rainforests to high-altitude deserts. The Inca arose in the highlands around Cusco.
They expanded rapidly, too.
Massively, under emperors like Pachacuti in the 15th century. They created Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters stretching thousands of miles. Their infrastructure was amazing: extensive roads, suspension bridges, relay messengers called chasqui, and their unique record-keeping system using knotted strings, the quipu.
And Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu is the most famous example of their stunning architecture, likely a royal estate or religious site, perhaps related to cocoa production, built high in the mountains.
And then the Spanish arrived there, too. Pizarro.
Francisco Pizarro. Inspired by Cortez's success, he led expeditions south. Crucially, when he arrived in the 1530s, the Inca Empire was severely weakened.
How so?
They'd just finished a bloody civil war between two brothers, Huascar and Atahualpa, fighting for the throne. And European diseases, likely smallpox, had already swept ahead of the Spanish, killing the previous emperor and much of the population.
So Pizarro arrived at a moment of extreme vulnerability.
Exactly. He arranged a meeting with the victorious Atahualpa at Caramarca, ambushed his retinue, and captured the emperor himself.
The ransom story is famous, isn't it?
Yeah.
A room filled with gold.
Yes. Atahualpa offered a huge ransom in gold and silver. The Spanish took it and then executed him anyway. With the emperor gone and the empire already reeling from war and disease, the Spanish conquest, though met with resistance, was relatively swift. They renamed the land New Castile.
Did Inca resistance continue?
Yes, for several decades. A rump state held out in the Vilcabamba region, adapting to Spanish weapons, even using captured horses and firearms. But the last Inca king, Tupac Amaru, was captured and executed in 1572.
One final case, maybe the most isolated. Easter Island, Rapa Nui.
Rapa Nui, a tiny speck in the vast Pacific, settled by Polynesian voyagers, incredible navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean.
And famous for the giant statues, the moai. The usual story is they destroyed their environment building them, right?
Yeah, that's been the dominant narrative for a long time. Overpopulation, deforestation caused by moving the massive statues, leading to ecological collapse, warfare, and societal breakdown before Europeans arrived. An ecocide.
But there are other perspectives now.
Yes, recent research suggests a more complex picture.
Oh.
While deforestation certainly happened, the society showed resilience. The moai construction might have been a vital community-building practice, not just a destructive obsession. Later rituals, like the Birdman competition, suggest adaptation, not just collapse.
So what did cause the near annihilation of the Rapa Nui people?
European contact seems to have been the truly devastating blow. Introduced diseases like elsewhere in the Americas, and then in the 19th century, Peruvian slave raids abducted a huge portion of the remaining population, including elders who held the key to their unique script, Rongo Rongo, which remains undeciphered. That cultural loss was catastrophic.
So the collapse narrative might be too simplistic.
It likely focuses too much on self-inflicted damage and underestimates both their resilience and the catastrophic impact of outside interference, particularly disease and slaving. The fact that islanders later worked to re-erect fallen moai shows a powerful connection to their heritage.
Looking back at all these stories, Sumer, Egypt, Rome, Maya, Songhai, are there overarching lessons? We talked about finding positive theories.
I think we see incredible human ingenuity and adaptability everywhere, building cities in deserts, jungles, mountains, developing complex societies, trade networks, philosophies. There's resilience even in collapse. Cultures persist. Ideas spread, people rebuild.
But also fragility. Environmental change, whether slow climate shifts or sudden disasters, is a constant factor. Over-reliance on complex systems, internal divisions, the impact of new technologies like gunpowder.
Exactly. And external shocks, invasions, disease can overturn even stable societies. It makes you think about our own interconnected world. Svante Arrhenius predicted warming from carbon emissions over a century ago. Now we're living it, talking about tipping points.
If our civilization faced a major collapse, what might it look like?
Speculation, of course, but huge cities might become unsustainable quickly. Nature reclaims things fast. Look at Chernobyl, or even just abandoned lots in cities. But humans are survivors. We adapt. These historical mindful moments show that cycles of rise, fall, and transformation are perhaps the norm.
It's a sobering but also maybe hopeful thought. The patterns are there if we look.
They are, and understanding them is crucial.
Absolutely. So we really encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these ideas. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more explorations like this one.
And share this analysis with friends, family, anyone you think might find it interesting. If you want to dive deeper into the source material we discussed, check out the link in the description.
Most importantly, though, keep thinking critically about these narratives. Rise and fall isn't simple. What lessons from these past worlds are relevant right now for the challenges and opportunities we face today? That's something to really mull over.